Aenig by Kaylee. Chapter 5. The mess hall, as usual, was a flurry of movement and a cacophony of noise by the time the firsts entered the large tent. Damien loved meals. He got to see all the people, and was reminded of just how far they'd come since the dingy little building where he and his brother had found Kale, and he'd found that first little spark of hope for their future, suspicious as insane as the concept had been at the time. Kale hadn't exactly been his ideal idea of optimism. Covered in blood, waving a baseball bat studded with nails and grinning manically, but he'd been human, and that had been enough. I was thinking about changing the mazes up a little, Dylan said, once they'd found their seats at the table with the other scouts. Make it a little more like the outside, rather than just metal walls. Or at least adjust the layout. I'm sure you could all run it in your sleep by now. That sounds like a great idea, Jana piped up from a few seats over. It also sounds like you're getting bored, if you're beginning to worry about something like that. It's been 4 years, the boy huffed sarcastically. Forgive me for thinking the people protecting me might want change. Damien listened to the banter and conversation with a light heart. Time was passing and it was healing. Looking around, most of the city was smiling and happy. Good vibes always came along with new survivors. It was uplifting. A tap on his back had him turning, and behind him stood the boy from earlier. Chi, if he remembered correctly. It wasn't hard to remember 4 names anymore. 200 people living in tight quarters, and you'd get to know them all. Hello, Chi. Would you like to sit with us? The child nodded and clambered up into the space Damien and Dylan had made for him, placing his tray down with a finality that had Damien thinking the kid had chosen his seat for the remainder of his stay here. How are you finding the city? Everyone has been nice, Chi answered, slowly putting food into his mouth. Dad still can't believe this is real. Mom's finally relaxing and Maka can't wait for tomorrow because she's already got a job. She's going to be a blacksmith. The other scouts had become interested in the enthusiastic little boy. It was nice to hear someone fitting in so easily. But I don't want to do that, he said sternly. I've thought about it really hard, and I've decided I want to be like you. The coos and ahs made Damien laugh. That hadn't happened in a while. Then again, they hadn't had many children survivors in a long time. How old are you, Chi? I'm 9, he stated proudly. I think. We haven't really been keeping track. Unfortunately, you can't start training as a scout until you're 14, Damien smiled. He wasn't unhappy about this. The fact that they had an age limit meant that there were enough of them. They weren't desperate. Will you train me? The child asked enthusiastically. No one had asked that before. Well, not of him. Unsurprisingly enough, the rumors about the firsts and their deeds had reached legendary status within a year. If you still want to become a scout by then, I will. They hadn't done half the outrageous acts that the field's late-night whispers accused them of, but Damien had been thrilled at the time that there had been room in their lives for something as ordinary as gossip and rumors. But until then, you can find a job that makes you strong and teaches you discipline. Don't listen to the stick, Cale chimed in on a chuckle. You'll learn as you go. Learning as you go nearly gets you killed, Silas grumbled, stabbing at his plate irritably. Don't you dare criticize my methods when you're living proof that they work, Cale shot back. Because of me, you got your tooth today. Tooth? Chi quipped, interest making his eyes bright. I got my first big tooth when I was 6. Cale sat back with a smirk, as Silas coyly produced the fang which now hung, white and clean, from a cord around his neck. Damien couldn't help being happy for the blonde, despite the annoyance he still had for his middle brother forcing the circumstances. That's quite a tooth, the commander whistled. How big was it? A little smile slipped onto Silas's face, and he seemed to relax a little. Pretty big. Congratulations went around, and Yana even called Trix over to request some celebratory drink. The wonders of having found a brewer 2 years back. Damien had been hesitant at the time, but alcohol would never go amiss. With only one person making it, no one ran the risk of excess. What did I tell you? Damien came back to Cale's boisterous bragging. The heat of battle determines the men from the fairies, and Silas, you are now one of us. Oh, so my girl is a man now? Maish asked with a cheeky grin. Don't you start with that feminist cuck, Cale warned jokingly. You know what I meant. That her gorgeous face, tactical prowess, and kill count that almost rivals yours is good for morale. The Cape Tonian stuck his tongue out at his girlfriend, and she threw a carrot at him. You're out of line, she snorted, before a smirk quirked her lips. But you're not wrong, ego much, Cale accused. Hot meat kettle, the woman countered with a wink, and the friendly ribbing continued. Drink was poured, and celebrations at their little table were well underway. Chi had even had a cup, before he piped up with even more questions, this time directed at Dylan. You're not very big. Are you a scout too? Damien laughed along with his troops, as his brother half choked on his drink. No, Dylan managed, once he'd finally got his breathing under control. I'm a tech. I'll be working with your sister. Then why do you have a tooth? The boy cocked his head in confusion. Damien saw his brother's face drop. With his long hair, not many people saw the trophy turn jewelry, and by the time they did, they were usually too polite to ask. Dylan's first kill was not a pleasant story. The tradition started before we built the city, the soldier said, hopefully steering the child's attention away from his brother. When we had established our first base at the University of Cape Town, he explained. It became a sort of status thing, and then it failed miserably. Jana chuckled into her cup. Why? She asked, too caught up in the story to recognize that the mood was shifting. Necklaces started getting ridiculously big, Maish offered around a mouthful of food. It became too competitive, and certain people, he gestured between Cale and Yana, started doing some messed up things just to pull teeth. So anyone who's killed a Mev gets one? The boy asked excitedly. It's not a rule, Silas answered. But if you're a scout, you're sort of expected to come back with one at some point. And you did thanks to whom? Cale asked, demanding his props, which the newest scout begrudgingly handed over. I hope I can get one before the Mems run out, Chi hummed. A sudden silence befell the group. Even if you don't, that will be a happy day, Yana smiled sweetly, even though they all thought they would never live to see it. Not for everyone, Cale spat harshly. His mood instantly turned sour. He pushed himself from his seat and promptly stormed off. Dylan sent a worried look his way, and Damien stood begrudgingly. I'll go talk to him. And with that, the good mood swept out of the room. Cale! Damien called after the man. Cale 6, don't walk away from me! The younger man grumbled and punched hurriedly at the button on the elevator to take him down. Leave me alone, he hissed. Don't be a child, Damien berated him, stepping inside with him once the doors opened. You're throwing a tantrum for no reason. We all know that there will always be Mevs. The time Chi is talking about will be after our lifetime. Hell, he probably won't even live to see it. Tell that to the 200 people we have living here, Damien, Cale shouted. There are no survivors left. Of course there are. We found an entire family today. Fine, there are a few, he growled. But it's been 6 years. How many more do you honestly think made it? With their food source gone, the Mevs are going to start dying. And then this will all be over and I'm not going to have a place anymore. He kicked the wall of the elevator hard enough to leave a small dent. Damien grabbed his wrist, forcefully turning the smaller man towards him. You're going to hurt yourself. Cale swung at him with the other. Damien blocked it and twisted the appendage, effectively slamming his friend against the dented wall. He pinned his wrists on either side of his head to keep him from hurting himself, and stepped in close to avoid the man's kicking legs. Like you really care. Cale spat in his arms, wreathing to free himself. But they both knew it would take a lot more effort than he was putting in. Of course I do. Damien hushed his friend calmly. Every time someone brought up the end, Cale would go on one of these rants, but this time seemed different. I know, you all just tolerate me because I'm useful, Cale hissed. When this is all over, do you really think that anyone will want me around anymore? The fight went out of him as fast as it had come, and he slumped against the metal at his back. Even as soft laughter rocked his frame, there was no humor in it. "You'll send me away just like she did." Damien sighed, but shifted the scared man into a hug that was hesitantly returned. "So you still have mommy issues," he grumbled into the head shoved under his chin. "She sent you away and locked you up for a reason. But you've been getting better, Cale. I've seen it." "And when I get bored again?" he asked, and the effort couldn't quite keep the obvious worry from his voice. "When the city settles? When all the maps are gone and there is nothing more for me to do? What's going to happen then?" Damien didn't have the answer. To be honest, he had fallen into the trap of believing that this was never going to be over. But Cale had a point. The number of survivors had not been the only thing to drop. Where the mamps they had encountered used to be in groups of 30 or more, they'd dwindled massively. The biggest group they'd come across in the last 8 months, they couldn't have been more than a dozen. Cale had every reason to worry, because Damien knew he was right. The second he was no longer necessary, the masses would want him out. He often forgot that the softly sobbing warrior he held was sometimes more self-aware than people gave him credit for. "Sure, you may be more than a little unhinged, but the fact that this upsets you just proves you're getting better." He felt Cale's breath hitch, and the smaller man's arms tightened around Damien in a search for comfort. "Look, I'll always owe you for Dylan, but we're friends. The only way you're leaving the city is if you're dead. I promise." It took a while for Cale's breathing to eventually even out, and when he pulled away, he couldn't look at Damien. "Tell anyone about this and we'll have a problem." "Likewise," the soldier agreed.